Okay, so again, the second midterm is scheduled for April 13th at 12:10 p.m. on Blackboard, so be there. So today we will do the second part of chapter 14, which basically involves discussion on gluconeogenesis and a little bit on pentose phosphate pathway. Okay. So before I go, let's talk a little more about how cells respond to condition which basically involves low oxygen pressure. Okay, so what we also known as hypoxic stress or hypoxic condition. Okay, one thing you will notice is that glycolysis that happens in cytosol, all the 10 reactions of glycolysis happens in the cytosol. Those enzymes are found in the cytosol. Is considered an anaerobic pathway, which basically means that this pathway does not require the presence of oxygen. It's not regulated whether oxygen is present or not present. Okay. And citric acid cycle, tricarboxylic acid cycle or Krebs cycle, which happens in mitochondria, is considered an aerobic pathway. Okay. So this is a very interesting concept. Although if you look at the reaction of the Krebs cycle or TCA cycle, you will see that molecular oxygen is not a substrate, real substrate in any of the reactions that we'll discuss in Krebs cycle, but it is still considered an aerobic pathway. And that's because citric acid cycle will shut down if there is lack of oxygen. And when there is a lack of oxygen, these reducing equivalents like NADH, etc., and FADH2, they were not able to transfer those electrons to molecular oxygen, in the oxidative phosphorylation reaction. And when that happens, when NADH concentration accumulates, for example, citric acid cycle will shut down. Okay, that's why we call tricarboxylic acid cycle aerobic. We'll talk more about that when we discuss citric acid cycle. So when oxygen is abundant, cells prefer to combine these pathways in an aerobic metabolism. But when oxygen concentration is limiting, such as, let's say, you are doing vigorous exercise and your skeletal muscles are working very actively, so actively that molecular oxygen is not being able to deliver to each of those muscle cells. And then in those conditions, cells adapt to carry out more glycolysis. Okay, because as I said, glycolysis is an anaerobic pathway, the one that is not dependent on the oxygen. Okay, so it does happen that if you actually create hypoxic conditions, you will see that your gene expression will change, and the changes will reflect in the increasing levels of glycolytic enzymes. Okay, so something that you should know. Certain cells, such as red blood cells and retina cells, for example, certain cells such as red blood cells, they don't have mitochondria, right? So if they don't have mitochondria, they cannot do citric acid cycle, because citric acid cycle happens in mitochondria. So these cells will primarily rely on anaerobic glycolytic pathway for energy production, ATP generation. Okay. And so it is not surprising that even when there is oxygen present, red blood cells and retina cells, they actually will produce lactate from glucose, even when the oxygen concentration is high. And this is something that is, we are going to discuss. This is a theme that you should actually start to get familiar yourself with, because if you remember what we talked about in the last class, how glycolysis produces ATP, and when you do not have oxygen present, what happens? This concept should be nicely integrated in your brain. Okay, that's what I am trying to say here. So I will repeat myself one more time. So if in general conditions, when there is plenty of oxygen, pyruvate will be brought into the mitochondria. And in mitochondrial matrix, you have pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, PDH complex, that will irreversibly convert pyruvate molecule to acetyl coenzyme A, and acetyl coenzyme A is the starting substrates for the citric acid cycle. So that's how that cycle will operate under aerobic conditions. But when you do have anaerobic conditions, you'll take pyruvate and use NADH to reduce pyruvate to lactate, okay? And that's what happens in contracting muscles. And in yeast, pyruvate is actually converted to the two molecules of ethanol and 2 molecules of carbon dioxide. And I will show you that reaction in the next slide here. When you are trying to metabolize pyruvate under anaerobic conditions, such as in contracting muscles, fermentation is the process that happens. What is fermentation? Fermentation is a process which actually extract energy, produces ATP, but do not consume molecular oxygen or change in the concentration of NAD plus or NADH. Okay, that's how formally biochemists define fermentation process. And so if you look at mammalian biology, you'll take pyruvate and you will convert pyruvate to lactate using the lactate dehydrogenase enzyme. Okay, this reaction is a reversible reaction, and you can see that you are basically converting carbonyl to a secondary alcohol, kind of, right? And in that process, when you do that, you actually produce NAD plus, right? And when you produce this NAD plus is regenerated and can be utilized to metabolize further glucose molecule via glycolysis. Okay, so this allows the glycolysis to continue. Okay. In yeast, what happens is you have pyruvate molecule, and with the help of this enzyme, pyruvate decarboxylase. Okay, we will also talk about today another enzyme called pyruvate carboxylase. Okay, but this enzyme is pyruvate decarboxylase. Decarboxylase means it will actually remove carboxylic acid group here. Using one metal ion, magnesium ion, and thiamine pyrophosphate as the coenzyme. And basically, pyruvate will get decarboxylated to generate acetaldehyde molecule. And that acetaldehyde molecule is then converted to ethanol with the help of this enzyme alcohol dehydrogenase, which will utilize NADH, okay, and produce ethanol and NAD plus. Okay, that NAD plus can be again taken up if needed to carry on glycolysis. Okay, so that's what happens to pyruvate under anaerobic condition. Because we are going to discuss gluconeogenesis, okay, where we'll talk about how new glucose molecules are synthesized from smaller precursor molecules. I just wanted to show you, to remind you what we learned in glycolysis. If you remember, in the preparatory phase, you basically start out with glucose and you produce 2 molecules of glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, right? 3-carbon sugar. And you use these 5 enzymes that are listed here on the right-hand side. If you recall, reaction 1 and 3, the reactions that are catalyzed by hexokinase, PFK enzyme, phosphofructokinase 1, PFK1 enzyme, and the 10th enzyme, pyruvate kinase enzyme. Those are the three reactions that are highly irreversible under cellular conditions, right? And those are the three enzymes that are the site of regulation when it comes to glycolysis, right? So keep that in mind. And so with that, let's go and talk about gluconeogenesis and what gluconeogenesis is and what it does. Okay. It turns out that humans, we consume about 160 gram of glucose per day. Okay. And 3/4 of that, about 120 gram of that glucose, is needed for the function of your brain. Okay. So the remaining, let's say, remaining 40 gram, 20 gram is in the body fluid. Okay. And some of the glucose is also stored as glycogen. Okay. So if you know what is glycogen, we have been talking about glycogen throughout. So glycogen is the storage of glucose in the liver and kidney. Remember, 10% of your liver mass is glycogen storage, and 1% of your skeletal muscle mass is glycogen storage. And glycogen polymer is utilized to ensure that the blood glucose levels are maintained at about 5.5 millimolar, okay, which will be 100 milligram per deciliter. Cool, right? So when you actually go and do an all-out exertion exercise, your glycogen storage can be depleted quite readily, right? It's like 180 to 200 gram of total glycogen storage you have. Let's say you skipped a meal and did some exercise, etc. On top of that, went for walking, your glycogen storage gets depleted. But remember, if you want to maintain homeostasis, you must maintain the sugar level in the blood to be constant around 5 to 5.5 millimolar. So how do you maintain that glucose level? It turns out that body has mechanism to maintain to make its own glucose when needed, so that it can restore, if needed, whatever glycogen was depleted, or actually to maintain the blood sugar level to be around 5.5 millimolar. So body has the ability to make new glucose molecule. That's why, through the process of gluconeogenesis. And it does that from some common metabolites, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Okay. Now here is something very interesting, and this is very important conceptually. First of all, gluconeogenesis mainly occurs in the liver and kidney cells, okay? Primarily in liver, but also in kidneys and small intestine to some extent. And it is not the mere reversal of glycolysis reactions. Remember, glycolysis reaction is a 10-step reaction we talked about, where you take a glucose molecule and at the end you make two molecules of pyruvate and you generate ATP. So if you need to make a glucose molecule from pyruvate, it's not exactly the same reactions you do, okay? Because if gluconeogenesis were just the reverse of the glycolysis, all the reactions were the same and enzymes were the same, then its free energy would be positive. Let's say for glycolysis, just as an example, if the overall free energy was minus 75 kilojoule per mole, and if you were actually doing exactly the same reactions, but taking pyruvate and making glucose, it will be now plus 75 kilojoule per mole, right? Or if it is a standard free energy was minus 85 kilojoule per mole, it will be, for gluconeogenesis, it will be plus 85 kilojoule per mole, right? And that would be not possible, right? So energetics has to work if gluconeogenesis has to happen in the cell. And so therefore, the reaction pathways of glycolysis and gluconeogenesis are not identical. What I mean by that is that gluconeogenesis reactions are not just the reverse reactions of glycolysis. It's a different set of reactions. Sure, some reactions are borrowed, but there are some reactions that are totally unique to gluconeogenesis. And those unique reactions are catalyzed by unique enzymes that are not part of glycolysis. And so, as I am saying, that glycolysis happens, all the enzymes and the whole process is happening in the cytosol. Gluconeogenesis is slightly different, and we'll talk about those reactions. Okay. One thing, it makes sense because you are still using some of the enzymes, and to be precise, I will say 7 enzymes of glycolysis are still utilized by gluconeogenesis pathways. Okay, so those 7 reactions does happen in the cytosol, and therefore it makes sense that when glycolysis is active, which means when you're taking glucose and making ATP via glycolysis, you must have gluconeogenesis turned off, right? It will not make sense that while you are breaking down glucose to make ATP, you are actually trying to make glucose molecule using ATPs or such high energy molecules. So that's why both glycolysis and gluconeogenesis processes are reciprocally regulated. When gluconeogenesis is on, glycolysis is turned off, and so on. Cool, right? Okay, so what is gluconeogenesis? Now here, if you look, it's a ubiquitous multi-step process in which glucose is produced from lactate, pyruvate, and pyruvate can come from alanine, for example, metabolism of amino acid alanine. Oxaloacetate are any such compounds that are part of citric acid cycle intermediates, are those intermediates that can be converted to one of these intermediates. Okay. So these metabolites can readily be converted to glucose. 7 of the 10 reversible reactions are catalyzed by the same enzymes as in glycolysis. So the 3 reactions that are different in gluconeogenesis are those 3 reactions that are completely irreversible under cellular conditions in glycolysis. Okay, so those 3 irreversible reactions, highly exergonic reactions of glycolysis, is now replaced or bypassed by new reactions that are catalyzed by gluconeogenesis enzymes. It's an expensive process, as you will see. You make 1 molecule of glucose using 2 molecules of pyruvate. That requires almost 6 NTPs, nucleoside triphosphate. To be precise, it will require 4 ATP molecule, 2 GTP molecule, and 2 NADH molecule. Remember, NADH is also an energy-rich molecule because it has electrons in it, right? So this is highly expensive process to make glucose, but there is no going around. Glucose levels in your blood must be maintained constant throughout, whether you eat a meal or skip a meal. And so therefore, this process is absolutely essential and has to be carried out when it is needed. In mammals, gluconeogenesis happens primarily in the liver, kidney, and small intestine. And it produces glucose molecules mainly for brain, red blood cells, and muscle cells. So obviously brain, red blood cells, and muscle cells, they do not carry gluconeogenesis. They lack the enzymes needed to carry gluconeogenesis. Okay, so brain, as I said, brain really uses glucose as the primary source of fuel, although it can use fatty acid as well, but primary source is glucose. It utilizes major chunk, 3/4 of all the sugar molecule you consume, brain takes it. And so when it needs glucose, when the glucose concentration in the blood is low, gluconeogenesis that will happen in the liver, kidney, or small intestine to some extent will produce glucose and release those glucose molecule in the blood. And so brain can actually get access to, red blood cells can get access to for making ATP. Cool, right? So here is the net reactions. You take 2 pyruvate molecule and 4 ATP molecule, 2 GTP and 2 NADH, and you produce a glucose molecule, 4 ADP, 2 GDP, 6 inorganic phosphate, 2 NAD plus. And you can see that standard free energy is around minus 37 kilojoule per mole. And that's because you can see that reactants and products are completely different. Although you are converting pyruvate into glucose, but the reaction is not just the same, but in reverse of glycolysis. It's completely different reactions, different pathways. So gluconeogenesis is still energetically possible. So again, so what substrates can be used to make glucose molecule via gluconeogenesis? As I said, you can use pyruvate, lactate, oxaloacetates, several amino acids, most amino acids except 2. And you can actually, and all citric acid cycle intermediates, okay, they can also be converted to glucose molecules. It turns out that mammals like us, we do not have the ability to take fatty acid and convert those fatty acid carbons to glucose molecule. We just cannot do. Fatty acid cannot be utilized to make glucose molecule. Why? Because when you actually metabolize fatty acid, you generate acetyl coenzyme A. And acetyl coenzyme A cannot be converted to pyruvate. Because remember, what I have been saying is that pyruvate to acetyl coenzyme A conversion in mitochondrial matrix is a completely highly exergonic, irreversible process under cellular conditions. So you cannot take acetyl coenzyme A and go back to pyruvate. That's what it means. And as a result, you cannot take the carbons of acetyl coenzyme A and make glucose molecule. It turns out that plants have the ability, and yeast and bacteria, they can take acetyl coenzyme A and they can convert acetyl coenzyme A to pyruvate molecule through what we call glyoxylate cycle. We'll talk about that little bit later on. Okay, but we cannot, we lack enzymes of glyoxylate cycle. Okay, so there is no net production of glucose molecule from fatty acids. Okay, so that's what it says here in green. Acetyl coenzyme A cannot provide for net synthesis of sugar molecule. Okay, you cannot use the carbons of acetyl coenzyme A in mammalian biology and convert those into sugar. And so again, reiterating the point, muscle cells, red blood cells and brain, they do not carry out gluconeogenesis. Blood glucose is the sole source of their energetic need. All right. With that introduction, let's talk about what is the process itself. It turns out that gluconeogenesis retains 7 steps of glycolysis, okay? And those 3 steps that are highly irreversible are the ones that are replaced with new reactions and new enzymes. And those are shown here in purple, green, and red. Okay. Pyruvate kinase reaction, where you take phosphoenol pyruvate and convert that to pyruvate in glycolysis, that reaction is replaced by 2 enzymes. And those enzymes are known as pyruvate carboxylase and PEP carboxykinase. Again, pyruvate carboxylate. We talked about pyruvate decarboxylate enzyme a few slides before when we were talking about metabolism of pyruvate to ethanol, if you remember. But this is pyruvate carboxylase. It will add carboxyl group to pyruvate, and PEP carboxykinase. Those 2 enzymes will replace the reaction that was carried out by pyruvate kinase with 2 different reactions. The other enzyme that is replaced of glycolysis is PFK1 enzyme. Okay, so fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase enzyme will replace the reactions of PFK, of glycolysis. And then finally, glucose 6-phosphatase. Okay, this is a very unique enzyme. Okay, these are not present in the muscle cells. That's one reason why muscle cells can't carry out gluconeogenesis. Glucose 6-phosphatase enzyme is a very unique enzyme, and we'll talk about that in a bit. That enzyme replaces the hexokinase reaction of glycolysis. Okay, so glucose to glucose 6-phosphate conversion in glycolysis is replaced by the reaction of glucose 6-phosphatase going to glucose by glucose 6-phosphatase reaction. And these four reactions, if you want to call it, are three replaced reactions, provide a spontaneous pathway in the direction of sugar synthesis. Okay. So delta G is actually negative under cellular conditions for making of glucose, although it is expensive, but still happens in the cell when needed. So what are the three reactions that are replaced here? Reaction number 1, 3, and 10, right? So let's look at the reaction of glycolysis and gluconeogenesis together in the liver, okay, rat liver. These are the reactions that happens in the liver cells. Pretty conserved in humans as well. So on the left hand side, you will see the reactions that are shown here in the pink of glycolysis. You know these reactions very well by now, okay? On the right hand side is the reactions that are conducted by that happens in gluconeogenesis. So as I said, only 3 reactions are replaced here, right? So let's look at the first one. Remember, we are going here from pyruvate going to glucose molecules. So from bottom, we are going to the top. So first reaction is we'll take pyruvate. With the help of pyruvate carboxylase, you will generate this molecule of oxaloacetate. Remember, you will need 2 pyruvate molecules to make 1 molecule of glucose. So that's why this number 2, 2 are there. Then oxaloacetate, with the help of enzyme phosphoenol pyruvate carboxykinase or PEP carboxykinase, oxaloacetate will be converted to PEP, phosphoenol pyruvate. And then you use the glycolysis enzyme all the way until you reach the reaction fructose 1,6-bisphosphate conversion to fructose 6-phosphate conversion. And that's where you can see that you have to remove a phosphate group. So therefore you'll need a phosphatase. So that's why the new enzyme, fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase 1 enzyme will be utilized, which will remove phosphate group from the first position to generate fructose 6-phosphate. And then once you have fructose 6-phosphate, you'll be able to convert to that to glucose 6-phosphate. And then another phosphatase enzyme, glucose 6-phosphatase, will now take glucose 6-phosphate and convert it to glucose. And then once you have the glucose will be released into using the specific transporter systems into the blood. So it can go to the destination. Cool, right? And so, yeah, completely different sets of reactions in gluconeogenesis versus glycolysis, although some of the intermediates are shared between the two pathways. All right. So let's talk about those reactions, individual reactions that are different. Okay. So first reaction is generating phosphoenol pyruvate from pyruvate, right? PEP from pyruvate. And this happens in 2 steps, as I said. In the first step, what has to happen is, remember, this is very important. Think about it. You have to really think about this. You are carrying out glycolysis, and all glycolysis enzymes are actually in the cytosol, and you are making pyruvate. So pyruvate is there in copious amount, let's say, in the cytosol. If it has to undergo gluconeogenesis, where you have to make, the cells have to make, especially the liver cells and kidney cells have to make new glucose molecule, then pyruvate must be brought into the mitochondrial matrix. Okay, that is key. Think about it. This is the separation of reaction. You can see how metabolism is beautifully regulated here by compartmentalizing certain reactions. So pyruvate will be transported into mitochondria. There is a pyruvate transporter protein that will do that. Okay. And in mitochondria, once in the mitochondria, right, pyruvate will be converted to oxaloacetate by pyruvate carboxylase reaction. And that reaction is shown here on the left-hand side. You are taking a bicarbonate and pyruvate molecule. Again, I will urge you to write these reactions so you are absolutely are able to identify these intermediates. Otherwise, you will be missing a carbon or two when you have to identify them. So very, very important for you to write down like a traditional organic chemistry and write the reaction, especially some of the common intermediates like oxaloacetate, pyruvate. Anyway, so pyruvate carboxylase is a very interesting enzyme that utilizes biotin to transfer this carboxyl group to pyruvate molecule, to that carbon, to generate oxaloacetate. Okay, so what is oxaloacetate? If you know the structure of pyruvate, you can transfer that CO2 carboxylate group on that methyl group of pyruvate and you generate oxaloacetate molecule. That's how you will remember what is the structure of oxaloacetate. Once you have oxaloacetate, then PEP carboxykinase, what it will do is that it will take a GTP molecule and oxaloacetate and basically convert that to phosphoenol pyruvate. And the reaction, they are doing arrow pushing to show you how the reaction happens. And I will totally, if you love organic chemistry, you will enjoy this. What happens is the two substrates, oxaloacetate and GTP, bind in the active site. And then active site will position these reactions in such a way that carboxylate, this O- will push to create double bond between those carbon oxygen. And because now that carbon in the red will have 4 bonds, that bond between carbon red and carbon black will break. And that bond is what is shown here to show you that they're pushing it to make carbon CH2 CO double bond. When that happens, carbonyl oxygen will become O-, right? If you push it, and that's what attacks the gamma phosphate of GTP to generate phosphoenol pyruvate. That's how you know PEP. You generate PEP. Okay, so that's what happens. So it turns out that why do you have to bring pyruvate into mitochondria? Well, it turns out that pyruvate carboxylase is only found in the mitochondria. That's how our biology, our biological systems, our cells have created, evolved this machinery, regulation of metabolism in such a way that they have compartmentalized certain reactions, like the reaction of pyruvate carboxylase. Okay, this enzyme is only found in mitochondria. That's why you have to bring pyruvate in. And it's an enzyme that requires biotin. So, and whenever you have, usually when you have a cofactor like coenzyme like biotin involved in a reaction, it basically means that there may be a transfer of a carboxyl group from one substrate to the other. That's when biotin actually plays a role. And I'll show you exactly at the molecular level how that reaction happens of pyruvate carboxylate inside the active site. But just to note here is that acetyl coenzyme A, not ATP, is an allosteric activator of this enzyme, pyruvate carboxylase. Okay, so whenever acetyl coenzyme A is accumulating in the cell, in the mitochondrial matrix, that's when pyruvate carboxylase will get activated. Okay, which basically means that acetyl coenzyme A is not being able to go through the citric acid cycle. That's why it will likely accumulate. And when that happens, that's a signal for pyruvate carboxylase to get turned on so you can make new glucose molecule. Okay, so when acetyl coenzyme A concentration is high, okay, pyruvate enters gluconeogenesis. But let's talk about a conversion problem in mitochondria. Mitochondria is fascinating. Cytosol is fascinating. Each are playing a very crucial role. But let's first just quickly look at the reaction itself of pyruvate carboxylate. So they are showing you ATP type of molecule right here, right? ATP actually. And then you have bicarbonate here. This bicarbonate will attack the gamma phosphate phosphoryl group, and you'll form this mixed anhydride. Very reactive intermediate, very reactive, but it doesn't leave the active site. When that happens, the biotin molecule, which is shown here, which is usually conjugated to a lysine group on the enzyme, one of the imide nitrogen will actually attack that carbonyl and will get charged with this carboxyl group shown here on the right hand side. Once it gets charged with the carboxyl group, then pyruvate molecule, remember this is a pyruvate carbanion. Why will you form pyruvate carbanion? Very easy to form pyruvate carbanion because that proton is acidic, fairly acidic, because if you take the negative charge, you can delocalize that negative charge onto this carbonyl, right? So therefore this carbanion does form, and then it attacks and you basically generate oxaloacetate molecule. Let's talk about why pyruvate has to come inside and why this has to happen. This reaction has to be compartmentalized. It turns out that concentration of NADH, again, note what I'm saying, concentration of NADH is 100,000 fold higher in mitochondria than in the cytosol. Remember, it's a mitochondrial matrix. That's where the respiratory chains are. That's where all these reducing equivalents go and transfer their electrons to this respiratory chain, which ultimately produces ATP. So in that concept, it might be easy to think about, logical, that NADH concentration must be very high in the mitochondrial matrix. And that actually is the case. People have calculated that. NADH concentration in mitochondrial matrix is 100,000 fold higher than in cytosol. Okay, that makes sense. But if you recall, you need to use NADH to make glucose molecule. If you go back to look at the reaction of taking pyruvate and making glucose molecule, you can see that you need 2 molecules of NADH. And if the concentration of NADH is already low in the cytosol, we must have a way to actually generate that NADH so we can still synthesize glucose molecule from pyruvate. Okay, that's where this conversion problem is. So what happens is very cool. Remember what I am saying, I am repeating myself, but let me say, glucose biosynthesis in cytosol. Why? Because remember, 7 of the enzymes are found in the cytosol. You have to utilize those enzymes. So they are found in the cytosol. So glucose biosynthesis in cytosol through gluconeogenesis cannot proceed until you have an NADH concentration high enough. And so what cells do? What do they do? This is what they do. They bring pyruvate into the mitochondrial matrix. Okay. And then once pyruvate comes in, pyruvate gets converted to oxaloacetate. Okay. And then oxaloacetate is reduced by NADH to malate. Okay. Oxaloacetate cannot simply just cross the mitochondrial membrane and go out. There is no transporter to bring oxaloacetate molecule out. So oxaloacetate, once you convert pyruvate to oxaloacetate molecule cannot leave the mitochondria. So it is reduced to malate. And malate has a transporter. Aspartate malate shuttle, we will talk about that last lecture. There is a shuttle system called aspartate mylate shuttle system that actually can bring mylate out and bring aspartate in. So that mylate comes out, and once mylate comes out, it gets oxidized using NAD plus to regenerate oxaloacetate. And that process, conversion of mylate to oxaloacetate, produces new molecules of NADH in the cytosol. And that's NADH actually can then fuel gluconeogenesis, synthesis of glucose molecule from, let's say, oxaloacetate. So literally all the cell is doing, right, is bringing pyruvate molecule in, converting pyruvate to oxaloacetate, right, pyruvate carboxylase reaction. Oxaloacetate, once converted, utilizes NADH where the concentration of NADH is already high. So this reaction is no problem. It goes downhill in the sense energetically favorable reaction. It generates mylate. Mylate concentrations builds up inside, it comes out by a transporter protein. Once it is in the cytosol, you just do the reverse reaction of converting mylate back to oxaloacetate. And in that, what you're doing is you are actually utilizing NAD plus and you are making NADH molecule that will be needed for the gluconeogenesis reaction. Somebody has their mic on, please turn yourself off. So, so that's how this thing happens. In what I'm trying to tell you here is that it's almost like bringing an equivalent of NADH from inside of the mitochondrial matrix to outside in the cytosol. That's what this whole roundabout reaction is doing. And that is an important reaction sequence because you are able to actually generate NADH in the cytosol, which you need for the glucose biosynthesis. So there are two pathways for conversion of pyruvate to phosphoenol pyruvate. Okay. And so those two pathways are shown here in this figure on the left hand side. So the pathways will depend on actually three things. Okay. What is the concentration of lactate or pyruvate? If you have readily available lactate, then the path that is shown here on the right hand side of this figure is the one that dominates. If you have enough concentrations of pyruvate in the cytosol, then the pathway shown here in the left is the one that dominates. And what else is important is what is the cytosolic requirements of NADH for gluconeogenesis. Okay. And so these three factors determine what happens, what pathways dominate from production, from conversion of pyruvate to phosphoenol pyruvate. So if you need to, if the pyruvate is the intermediate that is prominent in the cytosol, then you will take the pathway on the left hand side. Now here is the very interesting concept that you will learn in biochemistry. Certain enzymes, they do exactly the same reactions. They catalyze the same reactions. Okay. And those enzymes can be found in the mitochondria as well as in the cytosol. So what typically enzymologists say is that there are two isoforms of this enzyme, for example, carboxykinase. One is mitochondrial isoform and one is cytosolic isoform. So you have mitochondrial PEP carboxykinase as well as you have cytosolic PEP carboxykinase. Both exist. Similarly, you have mylate dehydrogenase enzyme that does exactly the same reaction, but there are two enzymes, one in the mitochondrial matrix and one in the cytosol. So those are the ones that I have boxed them, color coded them for you to pay attention. Okay, one in purple is malate dehydrogenase enzyme, and one in red box is PEP carboxykinase enzyme. So if the pyruvate is the readily available metabolite, then pyruvate is brought into the mitochondria. Pyruvate carboxylase will convert pyruvate to oxaloacetate, right? And then oxaloacetate will be converted to malate by malate dehydrogenase enzyme, mitochondrial isoform of that. And that reaction will basically utilize NADH molecule inside the mitochondrial matrix. Already NADH concentrations are 100,000-fold higher in the mitochondrial matrix, so it's no problem for the reaction. And you are basically generating malate. Malate is brought outside into the cytosol, where it is converted back to oxaloacetate by the cytosolic malate dehydrogenase enzyme. And in that process, you are able to regenerate NADH. So essentially in this reaction on the left-hand side, you are able to bring an equivalent of NADH from inside of the mitochondrial matrix to outside, which is awesome because you can utilize that to make glucose molecule. And then of course, oxaloacetate will get converted to phosphoenol pyruvate by cytosolic isoform of PEP carboxykinase. If lactate is dominant in your cytosol, then you will use lactate dehydrogenase. You will convert lactate to pyruvate, and then pyruvate is brought into the mitochondrial matrix, where pyruvate carboxylase will convert that to oxaloacetate. And oxaloacetate can be directly converted to phosphoenol pyruvate inside the mitochondrial matrix itself by mitochondrial PEP carboxykinase. And there is a transporter to bring phosphoenol pyruvate outside into the cytosol. So you can now utilize phosphoenol pyruvate to actually go up, right, in those reactions. So again, you can take, you will generate phosphoenol pyruvate. From there, you can go to 2-phosphoglycerate to 3-phosphoglycerate. You keep going up like that on the right-hand side. Okay, so this is pretty cool, right? All right. So here are the reactions of gluconeogenesis starting from pyruvate, right? All the reactions that are bypassed in glycolysis are shown here in the red, right? So conversion of pyruvate to phosphoenol pyruvate is a two-step reaction. We just talked about it. So you will have to do those reactions 2 times. Remember, you'll need 2 molecules of pyruvate, which is 3-carbon sugar, to generate a molecule of glucose. So some of those reactions are, that's why shown 2 times, 2 times, 2 times. And then you have the 2 phosphatase reactions that are replaced. Cool, right? All right. With that, the question is, remember, I have not talked about Krebs cycle or citric acid cycle or TCA cycles in any great length, but I am mentioning this as we are going through our metabolism lectures. And I'm mentioning just to the extent that you can handle it, okay? Tricarboxylic acid cycle, TCA cycle, is the central hub of the metabolism. Okay, what does that mean? It basically means that several intermediates of different metabolic pathways, they all converge to the citric acid cycle. Okay, so they generate intermediates that can actually be utilized by citric acid cycles to make ATP and NADH and some of these high energy molecules. Okay, so when we talk about amino acid metabolism, what happens is amino portion is metabolized to generate urea. Okay, but the carbon portion of the amino acid is utilized in such a way that they end up generating one of the key intermediates of citric acid cycles, or by several reactions, not in one step oftentimes. So some amino acids, I would say all but two, okay, and those two are leucine and lysine. All of these amino acids listed here, they can be converted to one of the intermediates of citric acid cycle, or to pyruvate, which can then be utilized to make new glucose molecule using gluconeogenesis pathway. Okay, so for example, alanine, cysteine, glycine, serine, threonine, tryptophan, all the carbon portion of those amino acids can eventually be converted to pyruvate. Arginine, glutamate, glutamine, histidine, proline, these can actually be converted to alpha ketoglutarate. And you will see that some of them have, can be converted to more than one type of intermediates. Okay. Succinyl-CoA, isoleucine, methionine, threonine, valine, they can be converted to succinyl coenzyme A. Phenylalanine, tyrosine to fumarate. Asparagine, aspartate to oxaloacetate. All these amino acids, therefore, you will see that lysine and leucine are missing from this list. All these 18 remaining amino acids are glucogenic amino acids, which means that their carbon portions can be utilized to make new glucose molecules. Okay. We'll talk more about that when we talk about amino acid metabolism. Now, the second reaction is the reaction that is catalyzed by fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase enzyme. Okay. And so what this enzyme does is it will take fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase and it will convert to fructose 6-phosphate. And it's a thermodynamically favorable reaction. In the liver, actual free energy is minus 8.6 kilojoule per mole. This enzyme is allosterically regulated. Okay. For example, citrate will stimulate. Citrate is an intermediate of citric acid cycle, TCA cycle. So if citrate accumulates, which basically will mean that citrate is not being utilized efficiently by citric acid cycle, then it will activate, it will go and bind to the allosteric pocket of fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase and activate it. If you remember, citrate is the molecule that inhibited PFK1 enzyme of glycolysis, right? Because if you recall, higher the citrate concentration, higher the energy status it reflects, right? So that makes sense that it was inhibiting PFK1. So citrate will stimulate. When the energy status of the cells are high, as evidenced by citrate concentrations being up, it will stimulate fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase enzyme. Fructose 2,6-bisphosphate, remember this molecule, very, very important regulator of both glycolysis and gluconeogenesis. Fructose 2,6-bisphosphate molecule is the molecule that actually reflects low energy status of the cell. I am, repeating myself many, many times, but it's worth it. Fructose 2,6-bisphosphate molecule reflects low energy status of the cell, low ATP concentration of the cell. And so it is not surprising that when the concentration of fructose 2,6-bisphosphate increases, it will bind to allosteric pocket and inhibit this fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase enzyme. The same molecule activates PFK1 enzyme of glycolysis, if you recall. Similarly, AMP molecules inhibits fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase. Okay. And this inhibition by AMP is enhanced when you have the concentration of fructose 2,6-bisphosphate. So please don't get confused between the molecule itself. Fructose 2,6-bisphosphate is the molecule, and fructose, let's say 2,6-bisphosphatase would be the enzyme that will hydrolyze that molecule. Okay, that's the enzyme. So just keep that in mind. All right, so those are the three molecules, important molecules that are allosteric regulator of this very interesting enzyme of gluconeogenesis, fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. And the reaction it does is simply taking fructose 1,6-bisphosphate and hydrolyzing it to generate fructose 6-phosphate. What about the third reaction? The third unique reaction of gluconeogenesis is the last reaction, which will actually generate glucose. So is the reaction catalyzed by glucose 6-phosphatase enzyme, right? This enzyme will convert glucose 6-phosphate to glucose. And it is found primarily, think about it, think how cool this is. This is only found in the ER, endoplasmic reticulum, of liver and kidney cells, and to some extent in small intestine as well, but mostly livers and kidneys. So this enzyme is a fascinating enzyme. Yeah, I will show you the structure and how it functions. But it is primarily found in the ER of liver and kidneys. And it plays a critical role in providing glucose during starvation, for example. Okay. Unlike most phosphatases that act on water-soluble compounds, this is a membrane-bound enzyme. Okay, and it actually associates itself with the internal membrane of ER. And I'll show you the structure. Again, muscle, brain, and red blood cells do not do gluconeogenesis. When cells have glucose 6-phosphate, it will be taken up by the ER, and that's where the glucose 6-phosphatase system, it's literally they call it a system, glucose 6-phosphatase system. This system includes the enzyme itself, right, phosphatase enzyme, and 3 other transport proteins that are part of this glucose 6-phosphatase system that is only found in the ER of liver and kidney cells. Okay. So what is that system? Let's look at this. Pictures are worth a lot more, right? So when reactions of gluconeogenesis have produced sufficient amount of glucose 6-phosphate, remember, glycolysis will be turned off. Glucose 6-phosphate, so here if you are seeing here, right, they are showing you the ER membrane right here. And inside the ER membrane is this lumen of ER. Okay, lumen of ER is an area that is enclosed by the ER membrane, and it basically is comprised of an extensive network of membrane tubules, flattened cristae, vesicles, and there are other organelles as well. But let's just focus our attention on the membrane of ER here. Okay, so they are showing you the cytosol, which is outside. They are also showing you at the bottom plasma membrane. Okay. So glucose 6-phosphate molecule is brought into the lumen of ER by this T1 transporter of glucose 6-phosphatase system. Once glucose 6-phosphate comes inside, there is this membrane-bound glucose 6-phosphatase whose active site lies in the inside of ER lumen, where it will go and take glucose 6-phosphate and hydrolyze it to glucose and inorganic phosphate. Then glucose molecule will travel to a specific transporter of ER membrane called T2. It will come out to cytosol, and through another transport protein, GLUT2, it will be ejected out into the bloodstream. Again, remember, gluconeogenesis, this phosphatase system is only found in the ER of liver and kidney cells. So it's actually doing this pathway inside of the ER and of liver and kidney cells. Inorganic phosphate will make its way through this T3 transporter system of glucose 6-phosphatase, and then it will go to the cytosol. Okay, so this is how glucose is released into the blood once new glucose is made. Now, released glucose can go to normalize blood glucose levels, or it can also be utilized to actually store away glucose as glycogen in the liver and in your skeletal muscles. Pretty cool, right? Think about it, how beautifully these pathways are regulated and how only certain types of cells do certain things for certain tissues. Like brain doesn't want to invest any energy trying to make glucose molecule. It is one of the most important organ in your body, and therefore it needs glucose ready. Red blood cells want glucose ready so they can make ATP, they can survive. So therefore liver does the work for them, kidneys do the work for them, okay, for making glucose. There are several such examples where tissue, play very important roles in regulating metabolism. I love talking about mechanism and just want to show you that glucose 6-phosphatase enzyme utilizes an active site histidine residue for catalysis. And what it does is it actually uses one of the nitrogen, sp2 nitrogen, to actually take glucose 6-phosphate, forms a phosphohistidine intermediate, and then a general base activates a water molecule, just like in chymotrypsin catalysis, and hydroxide will attack that phosphoryl group, and leaving group, in this case, imidazole leaves of histidine, and then you have generated glucose 6-phosphate. Glucose. Cool, right? Okay, so there's a question that I used to ask in the class. It's pretty straightforward, just asking you about a little bit about nomenclature. And the way it's written, you can see that the A is the correct answer. C4 of glucose is joined to the C1 of galactose by the glycosidic bond. Anyway, so that brings me to talking a little bit about, again, diabetes, metabolic disorder, which is going to affect 2/3 of the world population sooner or later. Remember what happens in diabetes, whether type 1 or type 2. You are not able to basically bring glucose molecule into the cell, right? Either if you have type 1 diabetes, you are not able to produce enough insulin or any insulin. If you have type 2 diabetes, that means your insulin, you have developed insulin resistance, which means that for each molecule of insulin that is produced, you are able to bring only less and less number of glucose molecule into the cell. You need higher and higher concentration of insulin to go and bind to the insulin receptor to bring same amount of glucose in. You are developing resistance, type 2 diabetes. And so it makes sense that any pathways that exist in your cells, in your tissues, that makes new glucose molecule, if we can inhibit the enzymes of those pathways, then at least we can control the sugar level in the blood, right? So it makes sense that we should work on some enzymes that actually are critically involved in gluconeogenesis pathway. So if we can inhibit, we can create a molecule that will become a, let's say, competitive inhibitor of one of these enzymes of gluconeogenesis pathways, then we can prevent gluconeogenesis from happening, let's say, in the liver cells, hepatic tissues, and therefore liver will not be able to release make new glucose molecule and release new glucose molecule in the blood. We can likely control the amount of sugar in the blood. So yes, indeed, gluconeogenesis inhibitors are considered the next wave of diabetes therapy. And so let's look at some molecules. Okay. The one that actually is shown on the left hand side is this molecule metformin. Okay. Metformin is the likely the first drug that is given to patients with type 2 diabetes. And what it does is it actually improves the sensitivity to insulin, okay, by stimulating the glucose uptake by glucose transporter. Okay, so it basically affects the function of these glucose transporter proteins, and it allows more and more glucose molecules to come in through those transporters. And also it turns out that metformin also reduces the hepatic glucose production through gluconeogenesis. Okay, that's another reason why this molecule is really, really a very standard care of therapy for type 2 diabetic patients. So you can see that that molecule looks like that, right? Then you have this molecule 3-mercaptopicolinate, and here hydrazine on the right hand side. These two molecules, they go and inhibit PEP carboxykinase enzyme. Okay. So pyruvate carboxylase, first reaction, the second reaction. Remember, if you want to show, I can show you. Right here, PEP carboxykinase reaction, where you take the oxaloacetate and make PEP, right? So they go and inhibit the PEP carboxykinase. Obviously, if you inhibit, the second enzyme of gluconeogenesis pathway going from bottom to top, of course, you are going to inhibit the pathway and you're not able to produce glucose. You will reduce the amount of glucose that is produced by, liver cells and kidney cells. Now, the molecules that are shown here, chlorogenic acid and S3483, they actually go and bind to T1 system, okay, and they inhibit the transport activity. So which will be the T1 system of glucose 6-phosphatase? Right here on the top. It will just go and bind to this channel, and therefore glucose 6-phosphate molecule cannot come into the ER lumen of ER of the kidney cells and liver cells, and therefore you just block the pathway. So yeah, there are enzymes. People are always constantly developing molecules that actually go and inhibit certain enzymes of gluconeogenesis. Cool, right? So that brings me to now talking a little bit about what happens when you are actually, exercising vigorously. Okay. It turns out that liver, I always say to my students, you can be brain dead and still live a decent life, right? I mean, not really. I don't mean to say that life will be great, but at least you can still look normal, and people who love you, will look at you and say, I'm happy he or she is alive. And at least kidneys, kidneys can fail. You can be put on dialysis, and you can stay on dialysis for infinite time. But liver is, one organ that actually is so critically important for your metabolism and the survival of your body. Is that liver does so many things. Okay, and it's small organ, but extremely, extremely important. That's why if you have hepatic cancer, right, it's like people die in no time because just the pathway, many pathways shut down. And so liver is really, really cool. So, always be careful with your liver. Try to, do things that will not harm your liver. But so let me show you some use of liver. Okay. If you do vigorous exercise, you will build up lactate. Remember, pyruvate will get converted to lactate, and you don't have enough oxygen, and so conversion of pyruvate to lactate is important. That's one reason why your muscles get muscle fatigue. But lactate eventually can be released into the bloodstream, where it can go to the liver and get converted to a very useful molecule that your muscles can again use. Okay. When you do vigorous exercise, you also accumulate NADH. Think about it. Why? When your muscles are vigorously contracting, right, oxygen is not able to reach to each one of those cells in those muscles. Because oxygen is not able to reach, your NADH are all those reducing equivalents that your body is producing as a result of metabolism. They are not able to transfer those electrons to molecular oxygen, right? So the concentration of these reducing equivalent builds up like NADH. That's why NADH builds up. Good, because there is a shortage of oxygen. So what happens to a lactate then? Lactate, it turns out, is returned to the liver. And liver, what it will do is it will actually reoxidize lactate to pyruvate by an enzyme called liver alcohol dehydrogenase, liver LDH. Once you have pyruvate, then of course you can use pyruvate, right, to generate more energy, right? Or you can actually use pyruvate to make new molecules of glucose by liver, right? And then release those glucose molecule into your blood. That glucose molecule can go back to your skeletal muscles and provide, get metabolized to produce ATP, so that your muscle contractions can happen efficiently. This process is known as Cori cycle. Okay. So here is what is shown here. You can see your skeletal muscles, and they're showing you the liver on the top, right? In your muscles, the ratio of NAD plus and NADH is maintained low. Why? Because NADH concentration will be high. Once the denominator is high, the concentration, the ratio of NAD plus to NADH will be low in muscle cells. That's why that thing is written here. In the liver, it's the opposite is the scene. You have high ratio of NAD plus to NADH. So what happens when your muscles are actually doing glycolysis? They are making pyruvate, they're converting pyruvate to lactate. Lactate is then released into the blood, where it goes to the liver. Because liver maintains a high ratio of NAD plus to NADH, lactate is oxidized to pyruvate by NAD plus, by lactate dehydrogenase enzyme in the liver. Then once pyruvate is made, you can take pyruvate and use gluconeogenesis, use 6 NTP molecules to generate new glucose molecule. And that glucose molecule can be released into the bloodstream. They can go back to muscles and carry out this cycle again and again and again. And this is Cori cycle right here. Pretty cool, right? How liver is helping your muscles do more exercise. Yeah, so that's why you don't want to be drunk, or don't want to have a lot of hangovers when you are trying to do some exercise. Your liver will be very unhappy. So how is gluconeogenesis regulated? I already said that gluconeogenesis and glycolysis are reciprocally regulated. So when one is on, the other one is turned off. When energy status of the cell is high, then glycolysis should be off, right? And whatever intermediates, pyruvates or some of the intermediates of the citric acid cycle, they can be used for the synthesis and storage of glucose molecule. Synthesis of glucose by gluconeogenesis, storage of glucose by production of glycogen. which you store again in your liver and skeletal muscles. Again, do not be confused the energy status of the cell to glucose. ATP and glucose, those are two different molecules, and they serve two different functions in the cell. When we are talking about energy status, we are typically referring to the concentration of ATP, or the ratio of ATP to ADP and inorganic phosphate, right? Glucose molecule is a molecule that we need not only for glycolysis, but also we need to have constant concentration of glucose in your blood levels and so on. So don't be confused. Students often get confused with that a little bit. And when the energy status of the cell is low, when the concentration of ATP is low, citrate concentration is low, glucose should be rapidly degraded to provide energy, right? And so the regulated steps of the glycolysis are the very same steps that are also regulated in the reverse direction. It's the same steps. So if you look at overall, this is one slide that you will see. On the left hand side, we are talking about the steps that are regulated in glycolysis and by the ligands that those enzymes are regulated by. For example, hexokinase is negatively regulated by its own product, glucose 6-phosphate. When glucose 6-phosphate is concentration rises, is not going further down the metabolic pathway, it accumulates, it will go and bind to the hexokinase allosteric pocket and will inhibit the reaction of glucose to glucose 6-phosphate. So glucose 6-phosphate is a negative regulator of glycolysis, negative sign of hexokinase, right? Fructose 2,6-bisphosphate, again the same molecule, which reflects low energy status of the cell. That molecule and AMP will upregulate the activity of PFK1, phosphofructose kinase enzyme. And ATP and citrate will negatively regulate the activity of PFK1. So those ligands are shown here, plus and minus sign. Pyruvate kinase is allosterically regulated by several ligands. Fructose 1,6-bisphosphate positively activates pyruvate kinase reaction. Okay. Remember, we talked about feed forward activation right there. Fructose 1,6-bisphosphate allosterically activates pyruvate kinase reaction. Whenever concentration of fructose 1,6-bisphosphate rises, it will go and activate pyruvate kinase reaction, so you can make more pyruvate and ATP. Acetyl coenzyme A and ATP will negatively regulate the activity of pyruvate kinase. And if you think about it, it will make sense, right? If there is higher concentration of acetyl coenzyme A, that will typically mean that fatty acid metabolism is happening nicely. Acetyl CoA concentration is high, no need to do glycolysis. It will inhibit pyruvate kinase reaction. Same goes with ATP. Alanine and cyclic MP dependent phosphorylation, those are also two different ligands, but you don't have to pay too much attention for now at least. On the right hand side is the enzymes that are regulated in gluconeogenesis. Pyruvate carboxylase enzyme is allosterically activated with acetyl coenzyme A and acetyl coenzyme A only, not ATP here. Just note, pyruvate carboxylase will get activated when acetyl CoA concentration rises. It will make oxaloacetate. The other enzyme that gets regulated is fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase. It is negatively regulated by fructose 2,6-bisphosphate, negatively regulated by AMP, and positively regulated by citrate. Okay. And glucose 6-phosphatase is regulated by only substrate level control, which means if the substrate is there, this enzyme will convert glucose 6-phosphate to glucose, otherwise it will not. Okay, the T1 transporter. So that's how these are the principal regulatory mechanisms in glycolysis and gluconeogenesis. Right? Activators are indicated by the plus signs and inhibitors are indicated by minus sign. And that brings me to discussing the last few slides on another very important pathway called pentose phosphate pathway. Back in old days, I used to discuss this at great length, at least 7, 8 slides. But I noticed that based on the feedback from students that it really gets to them. They're not able to handle this too much, okay? Because again, you have more metabolites, more enzymes, more memorizations, and so on. And so to make things little interesting and still be able to give you what this pathway does, I have minimized the number of slides, to maybe 1 slide, literally. Okay. So what is this pentose phosphate pathways? It turns out that this pathway provides certain very, very important metabolites that are needed for biosynthesis pathways in the reactions that are anabolic in nature. Okay, in the reactions that take smaller fragments and make larger micromolecules, reductive biosynthesis, for example. Okay, so it turns out that pentose phosphate pathway will provide NADPH. And we are not going to talk a lot about this, but NADPH, not NADH, but NADPH cells used primarily for reductive biosynthesis, okay, anabolic pathways. And so pentose phosphate pathway provides that NADPH that cells might need. For example, if they need to synthesize fatty acids from acetyl coenzyme A, or they may have to synthesize certain steroid hormones from steroids like cholesterol. Okay. So if we are not going to talk about fatty acid synthesis in Biochem 1, but if you do take Biochem 2, you will see that NADPH is utilized in the fatty acid synthesis pathway in the cytosol of liver and fat cells, adipocytes. So pentose phosphate pathway will provide that NADPH that these liver cells and adipocytes will need for the synthesis of fatty acids from acetyl coenzyme A. In addition to providing NADPH, it can also provide 5-carbon sugar phosphate, ribose 5-phosphate. Okay, if you remember ribose 5-phosphate, you will need to make RNA, DNA, etc. Right, ATP. So for that 5-carbon sugar, pentose phosphate pathway will take glucose 6-phosphate and provide you this 5-carbon activated sugar. And this ribose 5-phosphate molecule is needed for rapidly dividing cells such as bone marrow cells, skin cells, tumor cells, and so on. Why? Because those cells will need to make RNA, DNA, ATP, NADH, and all these different important metabolites so they can license their growth and cell division, etc. And this pentose phosphate pathways primarily operates in the cytosol of liver and adipose cells. Okay. So liver and adipocytes will use enzymes. They will basically take glucose 6-phosphate to be particular. And they will convert that to either NADPH or ribose 5-phosphate or both, depending on the demand of the cell. That's why pentose phosphate pathway exists. And it has some other names like hexose monophosphate shunt or phosphogluconate pathway. The pathway itself consists of 2 oxidative steps followed by 5 non-oxidative steps. What are those steps? I am showing you oxidative steps. Pay your attention to this pathway that is shown here on the left, right? So I'm showing you that oxidative phases are shown here in the right hand side and non-oxidative phase are shown here on the left hand side. And they're just showing you some reactions, but they're not showing you individual reactions. And I don't want you to know those reactions for your exam. Okay. So once you have glucose 6-phosphate, let's say cells brought glucose molecule in the cytosol, let's say by GLUT4 transporter protein, glucose got converted to glucose 6-phosphate by hexokinase in an irreversible manner. The fate of glucose is now sealed in the form of glucose 6-phosphate. Now this glucose 6-phosphate can go into various pathways, and we talked about that a little bit before. But in pentose phosphate pathway, what happens? It turns out that glucose 6-phosphate in 2 steps will be converted to 6-phosphogluconate molecule. Okay. And the first step is not shown here, but the second step they are showing you that what it does is it takes that oxidized molecule of NADP plus and converts it to NADPH molecule. NADPH is what you need for reductive biosynthesis, if you recall, right? And NADPH you need to make sure that your glutathione exists in the reduced form, which is actually needed. So glutathione reductase utilizes NADPH and reduces oxidized glutathione to reduced form of glutathione. In this third reaction, 6-phosphogluconate, again utilizing NADP plus, will make ribulose 5-phosphate. And it's actually decarboxylation reaction. So you started with 6 carbon, you make 6 carbon 6-phosphogluconate, and in the next step you basically lost 1 carbon in the form of carbon dioxide, and in that process you generated 1 more molecule of NADPH. That NADPH again can be used in the reductive biosynthesis of fatty acids and sterols, etc. So now you have 5 carbon molecule, this ribulose 5-phosphate. This ribulose 5-phosphate molecule can have 2 fate. Okay, 2 fates. One in which you can take this ribulose 5-phosphate molecule and take 6 molecules of them. Okay, 6 molecules of ribulose 5-phosphate. So this is a 5 carbon molecule. 6 molecules of that will be total of 30 carbon. You take 6 molecules of that and you can convert with the series of steps into 5 molecules of 6 carbon sugar, again 30 carbon, glucose 6-phosphate. You can do that, and you can do this process iteratively and keep converting every molecule of glucose, every carbon of glucose into carbon dioxide, eventually in 6 cycles. Pretty cool. Think about it, what I just said. Okay, I'm showing you 1 cycle here, but you can eventually convert this 5 carbon sugar ribulose 5-phosphate via non-oxidative reactions to glucose 6-phosphate. So 6 molecules of ribulose 5-phosphate will get converted to 5 molecules of glucose 6-phosphates. And you run that cycle every time, you can actually lose 1 carbon. So eventually in 6 cycles, each glucose 6-phosphate molecule will get converted to CO2. And in that process, you are generating, each cycle you are generating 2 molecules of NADPH that you can use for reductive biosynthesis. Very cool, right? And if you need to make 5 carbon sugar, like if you need to make DNA, RNA, and certain nucleotides and coenzymes, then ribulose 5-phosphate get converted to ribose 5-phosphate. If you remember, you need ribose 5-phosphate to make these nucleotides and coenzymes. So you can actually use that to make nucleotides, or to basically utilize the intermediate, so you can make all these nucleotides, DNA, RNA, etc. So in certain tissues, the role of NADH is to utilize this for reductive biosynthesis. And in certain other tissues, it also is utilized to counter the damaging effect of certain oxygen atom radical molecules, like hydroxy radicals, for example. And we are not going to talk much more than that. Okay, if you understood what is said here on this slide, you actually know enough about pentose phosphate pathway, how glucose 6-phosphate can be utilized. Okay, glucose 6-phosphate utilization in the cytosol depends on the cell's need for ATP. They will carry glycolysis, or if they need to generate NADPH, they will do oxidative steps of pentose phosphate pathway, or if they need to produce ribose 5-phosphate, so they can make nucleotides, etc., RNA, DNA. Right? So it will depend on the needs, cellular need. So clearly, glucose 6-phosphate, must be channeled properly into appropriate pathways, right? So when you need to carry out glycolysis, for example, to make ATP molecule, when cells need to do that, you definitely don't want to carry out pentose phosphate pathway, right? Because cell's primary need is to make ATP. So in those cases, glucose 6-phosphate will not be channeled through pentose phosphate pathway. Okay. Let's say if you are using glucose 6-phosphate and making NADPH, right, via pentose phosphate pathway, and NADPH is not utilized by the cells in reductive biosynthesis, what will happen? The concentration of NADPH will go up. And NADPH concentration, as it rises, it will go and inhibit the first enzyme of the pentose phosphate pathway, which is glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase. Okay. So again, feedback mechanism, inhibition mechanism here. So when that happens, pentose phosphate pathway is shut down and glycolysis will proceed. Cool, right? And so that could be the last slide, and it is. So let me stop the recording, and I will be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.